It is 6:30.
Want to bang my phone?
I'd like to make the announcement that this meeting of the Seguin Independent School District has been duly called and that notice of this meeting is posted in accordance with the Texas Opens Meetings Act, Section 5.1.043 of the Texas Government Code. Note at present, Mr. Amador is absent, but the rest of us are here, so we do have a quorum. So we will stand, and Linda, how about you lead us in the pledges? Feeling better?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Quick moment of silence. Okay, so we're here this evening for Mark to lead us through the evaluation process for our superintendent. It's can be a little overwhelming, I think, but hopefully this will ease some of those anxieties and get us through this, I hope, smoothly this year. Nice.
That is definitely the goal. So thank you all for being here. What you all have in front of you is a binder that we're going to use today, and then you'll see it again. We'll go through the timeline a couple of times. The binder is going to stay behind, but what you do have access to that you can take on, and of course the binder is yours, it has your name on it, so you can take notes on anything, but what you can take for today is what's in the left-hand pocket. And what's in the left-hand pocket, it should be a packet of two documents. The first one is actually the first section that's here in the binder, and it's really a timeline that we're going to go through today. So the first 3 pages is a timeline, and then the second one is very similar to the timeline. It's just in an easier to read format because it doesn't have dates, it doesn't have all the bullets and whatnot. It's just kind of like a checklist. So that is what you all have access to take to today. So I've broken this up in about 2 parts. I want to show a video. The video is a little outdated, but it still highlights all the important pieces that we're going to discuss that are going to be in your binder today. So we'll see the video. We're not going to play it in its entirety. So Mr. Lewis is going to play certain clips of it. There are maybe like the longest section is about 5 minutes, so there is time where we have to pay a little close attention, and then the others are short segments. And then after we watch the video, we'll go through the contents of the binder. Okay? All right.
I'm the director of the Leadership Team Services Division of TASB, which is the division that works directly with boards and superintendents on a lot of governance and oversight issues, including the issue of superintendent evaluation.
Thank you, Bill. And I've been with Leadership Team Services for about 13 years now and served on a school board for 2 terms prior to that. So I've had some experience both participating in and helping boards prepare for doing their superintendent evaluations. What we're going to be doing specifically in this session are first going over the legal obligations. Second, we'll be talking about some effective practices. We'll be talking about some potential pitfalls that can happen in going through the evaluation meeting and trying to reach consensus. And finally, we'll talk about some next steps and what you'll need to be thinking about now to get ready to do after your evaluation is completed. Let's start with legal obligations. First, we're going to look at some items that come from the Education Code. First of all, the Education Code talks about the fact that districts must appraise administrators at least annually. So for boards, that means they are the person or the entity that needs to appraise the superintendent. Second, the educational performance annual performance report, which is your AEIS report, must be a primary consideration in evaluating the superintendent. We know that the document evaluating performance is confidential. And also from the Education Code, there's a provision that says districts may not use district funds to pay an administrator who has not been appraised in the preceding months. We'll have Holly give us a little bit more information about that in a few minutes. From the Commissioner's rules, we get a little bit more detail about how you can conduct the process. But the Commissioner's rules are recommended, not required. And it also says in the Commissioner rules that those can be used in whole or in part. Now, one of the reasons for this is that in the Education Code, where it states that administrators must be appraised annually, it says you can do that using the Commissioner's recommended appraisal process or an appraisal process that is designed by the district. If you design your own, it must be done in conjunction with the district site-based decision-making committee with input from them and must be adopted by the board. The first thing that the Commissioner's rules say about the process is that you must have an annual calendar that includes at a minimum a superintendent goal-setting process, and that is a process for identifying the priority performance objectives for the superintendent for the year, at least one formative conference that would be used to update progress during the evaluation year, and a summative conference where you would review progress for the whole year. And the rules state that both the board and the superintendent will participate in these. Also from the Commissioner's rules, the superintendent is to be involved in developing, selecting, or revising the appraisal instrument and process. And the Commissioner's rules state that the board should use the local job description as applicable when developing an instrument. It also says that the board must include a student performance domain. This is to be included both for administrators who appraise other administrators and principals, rather, and also for the board when it appraises the superintendent. Board members must also show evidence that they have received some training in the locally established criteria and process. Again, this is a provision in the administrator appraisal rule, and it applies to anyone who appraises administrators. And also, if staff input is used in the appraisal process, it cannot be anonymous. Let me say just a little bit about the provision on receiving training in the locally established criteria and process, because that's an item that we seem to find a lot of confusion about. First of all, it does not require a certain course of study on superintendent evaluation or that you receive superintendent evaluation training from a specific entity. It's mainly to make sure that anyone who's going to be appraising administrators in your district understands the instrument and process that has been outlined by your district and has some familiarity with skills in doing appraisals. So the kind of thing you would need to do in order for a board member to participate in an evaluation is simply sit down with a new board member during the local orientation and have the president go through a copy of the blank evaluation instrument, review with the board member any superintendent performance goals that have already been established, and to talk through the calendar so board members know when they will be expected to do certain things in the process and how the process works. So that's really all that's required for board members to meet this provision. The Commissioner's rules also outline some criteria that may be used, and you see them listed on your screen. Most of these are categories that you have seen in your superintendent appraisal instrument previously if you have participated in superintendent evaluations in the past. One of the things that's not always understood, though, is that your appraisal instrument does not necessarily have to have a category for each one of these items.
All right. So I wanted to pause it in several pieces and then talk to a couple of things. So far what we've heard is that we have to go through the training, so this is the opportunity to go through that training, and then that we have to be able to have a conversation around the goals and whatnot. And so I know earlier in the year when you all came on board, there was an opportunity, am I right, to revise or to review, not to revise, or there may have been revisions in the goals, and so that has happened already. And what we're going to do for the rest of today is view a couple of other pieces and then go through the timeline. And then we are also going to discuss as we go through this how I think, in conjunction with you all and of course with Dr. Gutierrez, how we can make this process a much smoother, better process that is fair, but is also accountable, right? Because I think right now, as we go through it, we're going to see that we can be a little tighter on some of the things. And so as we go through this, if you have any questions, please stop. What I didn't want to do was just talk through all these pieces, but there you will see that's kind of what they're saying, very broad, right? That applies to everyone, and then we'll see in local context what it means in Seguin, okay?
Or even a question related to each one of these items. These are areas that are recommended that you cover, but you can do that by grouping those into larger categories and set a specific number of indicators that expresses the things that are important to you within any of those categories. Now, there are a couple things I want to mention that are new from this past legislative session that came out of House Bill 2563 that provided some new items on governance responsibilities for boards and management responsibilities for superintendents.
So we're going to stop it there, and we're going to move forward. Bill, is there anything?
It says to continue.
Okay. Go ahead and play it then through the 8. Is it the 8 mark? The 8 minute?
50.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and play it.
First is that specifically the Education Code now lists that the board has authority to evaluate the superintendent. As we went over that previously, I mentioned that that was a provision that applied to all administrators, that this one specifically names that the board has authority to evaluate the superintendent. Second, there's a provision that says the board is to ensure that the superintendent is accountable for achieving performance results, recognizes performance accomplishments, and takes action as necessary to meet performance goals. Now, this doesn't say you have to include that any particular way in your superintendent evaluation process, but knowing that this is mentioned in the Education Code now, that might be something that you want to make sure that your instrument and process has a place for you to talk about. And finally, another new addition to the Education Code is that the board is to ensure that the superintendent is properly maintaining the district's financial procedures and records. So we'll talk a little bit later about the instrument and some of the items that oversee the superintendent's performance as a manager of the district. But you might want to make sure that in that part of your instrument that talks about financial responsibility, there is a place where the board can make sure that the superintendent is doing this task as well.
Okay, so we're going to skip a little bit. As I said, this is a little outdated. These things have been in place in the previous instrument, and we'll have an opportunity when we look at the instrument in a couple of months to show you all the evolution of the instrument that we're going to use to evaluate Dr. Gutierrez.
So there's been no changes to House Bill 2563?
No. So even though this says that it's new, it's not new. It was new several years ago. But all the policies that we're going to review in a little bit, before we made the copies, Ms. Polasek, Monica out of my office went through and just did a policy review just to make sure that every single one of these is the most up to date and there hasn't been any changes.
Got it.
Okay.
Evaluation. And I just want to remind everyone here that that refers to the actual evaluation instrument. Sometimes we find that people misunderstand that to mean that they cannot ever discuss in, for example, open session, any performance concerns relating to the superintendent. Now, there may be governance issues and reasons that you don't want to discuss the superintendent's performance in open session. Those matters usually take place in closed session, and that is permissible. But that's not because you're going to violate some sort of confidentiality law. It is the actual instrument document that's confidential and that, as a matter of fact, cannot be released even in response to a Public Information Act request.
Oh, let me ask you a question that I have gotten before, and that is when we come to the area of trying to compile evaluations into a single document, there are some districts that have had the practice of having board members complete those and turn them in advance to either the superintendent or the president or the superintendent secretary who tries to compile all of those. What would you say to a district who typically gives all of those documents to the superintendent secretary to compile? Is that a problem that a secretary is seeing what comments board members have made about the superintendent's performance?
I do not have a problem with the secretary seeing that document, those documents, even though those are, again, that I think those make up the confidential document. And the reason I don't is because there are certain employees that, because of the nature of their job duties, are going to have access to confidential information. And it's our understanding that they come under the confidentiality provisions of the statute. Many times the superintendent secretary also operates as the minute taker and goes into closed meetings and hears conversations that normally members of the public and people who are not on the board and not the superintendent can't hear. But we consider that appropriate because she's under that umbrella of confidentiality. I think the same analysis applies to those tally sheets that the board members develop.
One of the things that we have been cautioned about is having...
That's where you want me to start.
All right. Any questions about confidentiality? This was really brief, but I think it highlighted a couple of important points.
So no one else sees the discussions or the comments, just the secretary of the board?
The secretary, the board, myself, because I put it together, but what I see is actually a redacted version. So we don't see, and I'm going to talk about that process in a little bit, individual comments. So every single one of you will have the opportunity, and please step in, Ms. Thomasina, because you've done this several times. Every board member, okay, one time. One time. Every board member has the opportunity to submit their own document, and then you're going to come to consensus on one. That's submitted to the attorney. In the past, the attorney has been here. It's my understanding that it's not a requirement for the attorney to be here. It could be that at the end, Ms. Thomas Jimenez gets all of it together. She types up one final document. That is what will go to Nancy and myself. Of course, it'll be redacted, but that's what we will use to compile an official copy, and that's what stays.
And this will come back. So you'll have the opportunity to take this home once the evaluation is ready to take notes, and then you submit that, and you give that to Nancy so that it goes to the board president, so that so Nancy does have to be the one that maintains the record.
And we'll go into the details of what that's going to look like for you all.
So does the HR director also see those sheets?
She hasn't in the past.
She just sees the final, and you said it's redacted other than... Okay.
Of course, it is confidential. One of the things that I often recommend to boards, though, is that before you leave the room after the summative evaluation, it might be a good idea for the board president and the superintendent to just have a brief conversation about what, if anything, will be said to the media about the results of the evaluation, because frequently board members or the board president in particular will be asked by the media subsequent to the evaluation how the evaluation went. And I think it's a good idea for the board president and the superintendent to come to some agreement about what, if anything, will be said in response to those questions before anyone leaves the room.
It's an excellent suggestion, Bill.
I don't see any other questions that have come in now, so let's see, we do have one. Can prior year evaluations, can prior year evaluations be viewed? This is a question, Holly, that we get often by board members who are interested, who come in during the middle of an evaluation cycle, say they get on the board in May, it's coming up on January, and they want to see the previous year's evaluation. And not just the blank document, but how the superintendent performed and was rated by board members. What would you say to that?
I do believe that a sitting board member can see evaluations that have been done in the past. And as a matter of fact, I don't know how you could do this year's evaluation without looking at last year's. You have to have some idea of what the targets were that were set for the superintendent. I don't see that as being any sort of confidentiality concern. You're accessing them in your official role as a board member.
One of the questions I would ask someone who wants to use, to look at last year's evaluation instruments is what they are looking for, what they want to see. If you're just looking for what were the targets that are set for this year, so you know how to evaluate them on whether they met the targets, you don't necessarily need to see what the ratings were from last year. So I think it would be important for a board member to be clear about what they're hoping to find in that, why they want to look at those.
Absolutely. I think anytime a board member is looking at previous documents, that it needs to have some relationship to present day activities. So if you would like to access the last year's evaluation because you need to know what the goals are so that you can determine whether or not the superintendent is meeting those goals this year, absolutely you should be doing that. I don't think that you're often in a problem area if the board member is trying to access the superintendent evaluations for the last few years because the new board member just doesn't really like the superintendent. That's not the way to go about it. We have a forward-looking approach to that.
All right, and I think that's the end, right? So the last piece, when this was taped, it was like a live webinar, so people were submitting questions, that's what they were answering. And that's just about, can we view last year's evaluation tool? And most definitely, so when we get to that point, you will see last year's redacted evaluation tool with the overall ratings and whatnot.
And was the instrument that was used last year, is it very similar to the instrument of this year?
So there is some crossover, but it is going to be different, and I'm going to explain why we're asking for a different instrument that you all will get to view, and then you all will approve before we accept it as the instrument. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get to that first page in the binder. The first page on the binder just reiterates some of the things that was said on the video. So this is the commissioner's rules, right? This is what TEA says that we have to follow. So you see that there's an A and a B, and so the A says that we have two choices. We either follow the commissioner's tool as is, or we have a local superintendent appraisal system. It's my understanding, and I didn't go back far enough, but Bill, maybe you have some insight to this, that we've had a local appraisal instrument for at least several years.
Yes.
And so what we're going to develop this year is going to be considered a local evaluation, and it's really a hybrid between what TASB says they recommend and what we've had in the past. And so we're just refining it, and the reason that we're refining it is we want it, again, this is all about alignment, right? I think we've done a really good job of coming in with a 90-day plan, identifying some priority areas that became the strategic plan, and then we've just kind of built from that, right? Last year, as we were looking at the evaluation instrument, I believe that happened in August, September? Maybe
It was August, September.
We really didn't have an opportunity to say, here is the strategic plan, here is the instrument, let's tweak it, let's take it to DEIC, because the District Education Improvement Council has to see it. And so what we did was we literally just rolled forward the previous instrument for the previous superintendent. And what we tried to do was just connect to the strategic
As
improvement
best
plan.
as we could.
Right.
And I feel like it'd been used for an extended period of time. It just was a little outdated. But again, I don't think we were at a place to go through this process until now.
Because he had barely been here a year at that point.
You mentioned a district council.
Yep.
Who's part of the council?
The DEIC, so there's representatives of the business community, parents, teachers, administrators, both from the campus and central office. And I chair that committee. So we just, for example, we meet almost monthly. And really our business is about all the district improvement planning. So what goes into our district improvement plan. They also help make suggestions around like textbook adoptions, anything major, maybe like around calendar. We show them the calendar, PD. So there's just another body that's looking at this saying, yeah, we agree with this or we don't agree with this, and they make recommendations.
So the district level site-based team, so the campuses have their site-based teams and the district has a site-based team at this district level.
So again, we hit bullet A. Part B from that commissioner's rule just says that at a minimum, it has to include two things. There has to be some sort of evaluation, that's the number one, and number two is the student achievement domain, which we're going to look at closely right now. So now we come into the timeline. They suggested that we have a year-long timeline. We have a timeline between April and August. So something that I think we need to work towards, remember when I said there's some things I think we can make tighter, is that we expand this timeline to be a true calendar year, right? So from evaluation to some formative, like and again, we could have put some pieces in here, but I just wanted to share that with you all and just kind of get some feedback from you all. Maybe it was in October when you all had that workshop and you looked at, I can't remember, to be honest.
Sounds about right.
I don't remember sitting in. We weren't here in October.
What was the question?
So then it would have been afterwards. The time goes so
December.
quickly. It was
Maybe December, January.
Yes,
Okay.
it was.
Yeah.
It was after we went to the XG Summit.
Yeah, I think that's about right when y'all
Yeah.
came back and you looked at some of those
Right.
goals.
Yeah.
Yeah, over there.
I think what we're going to learn from XG next month about goal setting, I think that's another process that we can tighten a little bit more. And so ideally, the reason I share that is right now we have a calendar that shares April, May, June, July, and then August. And I think we could have a better calendar for next year.
So you're saying you want to do a calendar year, do you mean like
And it
school calendar?
could start in August, like from the day,
August to
From
Start
August.
with the actual evaluation, which takes place in
Yeah.
August.
and then go through.
July.
Mhm. And that way we can include like that formative meeting that you all had, and maybe any training that impacts or could impact the evaluation or something like that. So those are things that I think we just keep you tighter on. So back to this. In April, all this is saying is that we're going to spend some time going through this training. And what we're going to do is we're going to review all legal and local policies, any documents that pertain to that. We're also going to view the individual response forms that's currently being drafted. I don't have a copy of that right now, but we will have a copy for you all in June. And you'll see why June, and that should make a little bit more sense. And then of course you will also see the annual superintendent evaluation summary report. That's the previous year that they were talking about. And so when we share the new instrument, you'll be able to see the previous year's instrument as well. And then the other thing that we have to do today is just review the timeline and the calendar, which is what we're doing right now. And then next steps in preparation for 1920 is just what I've been talking about. Just making this process a little cleaner so that it makes sense to everyone, and I think we just end up with a better product. Okay? So we flip the page, now we go to May. In May, on May 6th is when we will share that draft instrument with DEIC and get some feedback from them. And then once we get some feedback from them, we will share it with you all in June. Right now it says that in the regular board meeting in June is when you all will see the document. And then again in July, you will actually approve it. And then in August is when you actually have the summative conference. When I was working with Dr. Gutierrez earlier, he was considering possibly another workshop in June before the regular board meeting, so that it's not the first opportunity that you all see it in the regular board meeting. Anything that you want to add to that, Dr. Gutierrez?
We thought that, because we were looking at planning, was it a May 14th workshop, and just adding that time on that workshop to be able to review that draft evaluation tool.
It's also the day we have to
Canvas.
canvass the votes.
We already have the special board meeting.
so we'll
That's the day
We
we
thought
have.
we just
We have to
utilize
use that
that to
time to
review
review
that tool, and you'll have an opportunity to look at the previous one and in the draft that the DEIC had an opportunity to review.
So DEIC is going to see the instrument before the board's going to see it.
That's how it's currently set up because that's when the meeting falls. And again, those are things I think we can
Clean up for
we can
next
clean
year.
up just now.
Is that May 14th meeting? What time would it be?
I have it at 5:30.
We wanted it early because it was the canvassing, but we can move it if we need to.
We can.
It's also the band concert.
Well, that's
Well, that's why we
band
had it
concert.
early.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't anticipate the band concert is at 7. That was the spring concert. I think we'll be fine.
Canvassing just takes 2 minutes.
Start at
It's very
5:30.
short. So
That works.
can you make it 5:30?
I will
Give it your best shot.
give it my best shot.
I get off at 6, but I'll see it.
Send her a song.
That's okay.
With your best shot.
They're good at
in the
entertaining
audience,
themselves.
right?
Canvassing, you only have to have 2 people here anyway, so.
Oh, okay. We don't have to have a quorum. Okay.
But right after that.
But if we're going to look at the evaluation tool, we will.
But
Correct.
if we need to have an opportunity to meet with someone who can't be here, we'll make sure that we arrange that time.
Right. And then again, regardless, you have that opportunity to review it in June. And then in July, the board reviews again the instrument, and that's when you confirm the dates and the actual process, which you're going to follow in August. So you'll have multiple opportunities to see it. And before that August date, what we'll do as an SLT, and we're going to get into some more detail earlier, is we're going to put together all the artifacts that support the work that's happened for each of those categories. Okay? And I'll share with you some of those categories in a minute.
Has August always been a time for this, or was it
Yes,
It's
Yes.
kind of went askew when Mr. Rowan left.
yes.
Things just kind of got off on a different calendar.
And so it fell in, because I have to be evaluated within 18 months of being hired, and this was like
Right,
cutting it
absolutely.
close. And I mean, I think personally, I think it makes sense because you've just completed the school year. You've got the data that's come in from spring testing. The only thing that I would recommend is I think we can agree that it did cause a little bit of anxiety for staff and people in the community when we had a meeting in August and September with the evaluation. I obviously knew where we were, but others seemed to get worried. But I think we'll be fine this year. I think with the efforts that we're putting forth, the preparation, and where we're going with the XG that's really going to support this work, I think the process should be flawless.
I didn't know if August was a nerve-wracking time to do this.
It's hard with school starting.
I mean, obviously we can't do anything about it this year, but future.
When would be the ideal time for a superintendent?
You see it done at different times. I mean, and it's something that could be pushed even to July. July's not as busy, but of course there are a lot of folks on vacation. But that July board meeting, if you go to June, you don't have
Right.
the testing
With
all of the data.
And I'm going to show you the amount of data that we have to collect.
When does the data usually come in, like mid-June?
And the final data comes in by mid-June for sure.
Well, this August meeting's at the end, and we'll already been in session for about 2 weeks, right? So shouldn't be that
Yeah.
stressful.
But again, as we develop that year-long calendar, what I'm doing is I'm taking down notes.
Okay.
And as we go through that process, and if it makes sense to move it, then I think it's something we can do if needed. And so just to go through that August, so you guys will go into closed session. That's when you'll conduct the evaluation, what's called the summative evaluation meeting. each of you before then. Sometime, if it's not, it just depends. I think this last time we had like a special board meeting, or maybe there was a board workshop, I can't remember. So we gave you all that, the packet then, which was this with the instrument, so you all have time. I want to say you all probably had about a full month, 3 weeks to a month probably, to go through all this and do the individual evaluations, so that when this board meeting comes, you've already done all your homework, you've already done all your evaluations. You bring this to the meeting, and that is what you all come to consensus on. And then what will be a final product is that one document instead of having 7 documents, right? You'll come to the one document with the one rating for each of these components that I'm going to show you all a bit. Again, I left the way it was there. The board attorney was present. We can decide between now and then whether we want to continue that practice or not. But then ultimately what has to happen is we get that redacted copy, or we get that copy to Nancy. That's if it's not the board attorney who's there, Nancy will redact any individual comments, which should not be on that final anyway. And then we will put it as a final that gets stored away as the official copy.
So during that month that we have the packet review, if you have any questions?
If you have any questions, what's been the process? I don't want to misspeak.
I mean, if you have any questions related to one of the areas, I mean, you can certainly just ask me and give you.
I mean, the first time around is going to be
right.
Yeah,
Right.
call, text.
And this is just the second go around for Carl and Ben and I. The first go around wasn't very smooth.
We can
So I'll help you as best I can.
So there's a component that we do on our own?
Well, you're going to get the full instrument. And actually, let's do this.
Don't do that.
When I do this is the full instrument with all the data sources. It is a binder. Let's do this so that it makes a little more sense. Let's flip to, it's the tab that's called TASB, Superintendent Evaluation Recommended Docs. So the first page is a lot of stuff that I already iterated about the options. The second page talks about the domain worksheet. So if you flip to the next page after the domain worksheet, it looks like this. This is the domain worksheet, and this is why we have to have a lot of that data, and why before June it probably wouldn't make sense to do this. I'm not going to go line by line, but what you will have is a full copy. And on here, it starts very simplistic. So if you go to page 3 of 10, page 3 of 10 is going to say, where were we in 2018, right? Because they are always going to be a year behind, and then we will have this current year's data. So in 2018, which we already know, we were a C district. Okay, so we will check that off. Where were we in student achievement? And we're going to check every single one of those for you. When you flip it, then we begin to talk about distinction designations, right? So every campus has the opportunity to earn those, which are those gold stars, and we will have that populated for you already.
And this is going to be...
This is always a year behind, but so you'll have 18 data in there. But we could also do at that time, if you think it makes sense to say, and how did we do 19? But what legally has to be on here is 18. Okay. Closing the gap data. So that looks at our individual student pops. We're going to pre-populate that for you, so you'll be able to take a look at that data. Flip the page. This is the same thing. What are the current year results? So by special population, for example, how did our Hispanic students do? How did our white students do? How did our economic disadvantaged students do? So all this will be pre-populated for you. And I'm not going to go line by line, but so forth and so on, right? So that's one piece. The other piece, if you keep flipping, you're going to get to the page at the top. It says Superintendent Evaluation Instrument. Looks like this. Just flip a few pages down. still in the same tab, but just a few pages down. This is TASB's recommended, and like I said, what we are going to do, and we already began to draft it. Obviously, it's not final. We're just putting it together to see if it makes sense. Is we took TASB recommended with last year's tool, and all we're going to do is merge it. Okay. And so if you look at that on the first page, it talks about their rating scale. Our rating scale currently, as it stands, is a 0 to 100 scale. So everybody understands that, right? That's easy. And at the end of the day, it doesn't even have to be for everybody to understand, because the only people who have to understand it is the people right here around the table. But it's a 0 to 100 scale. That's TASB's recommended, okay? Flip to the next page. At the top, it says Part 1, Report on Student Performance. That is the domain worksheet that we just saw, okay? Of course, you're gonna have all that pre-filled already.
It's actually on the same page, yeah.
Yep.
Is it? I thought it was on this page.
Looks like this.
Then I didn't see it.
Keep going. We're almost there.
This one?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
So that is the domain worksheet. If you flip one more page, this is where theirs differs, and this is where I think we have an opportunity to talk, especially after the XG Summit. They have the district goals, and then they have key performance indicators. Our district goals, the only goals that we have that have a number tied to anything right at this point is what's in our district improvement plan, right? I think that we have to revisit. And so that's how they lay it out. Ours is going to look different, but I wanted you all to just get an idea. And then finally, where you begin to see those sections is the following pages. At the very top of the page, it says Part 3, Assessment of Ongoing Responsibilities. And now it breaks it up into the day-to-day of what the superintendent's job description entails. So at the very top, you should see where it says Educational Leadership. So under Educational Leadership, you see A, B, and C. The first one is Instructional Management, right? The superintendent has to make sure that we have a good instructional plan and that he's managing that plan. So we're going to keep that language, I think, because that's obviously important. And this is where we will begin to merge what the old document had and the language of the new document. And again, we don't know when that document was created. We can go back several years. But I think what this is that this is definitely some language that we're going to hear very common practice, because it's the most up to date. And you can see, so then there's some bullets, right? So we would provide some information on how the district determines deficiencies or areas for improvement, right? So what is our school improvement process? And what we will have for you is, here's our school improvement process, and here's some evidence of what we did. So when I say the binder's like this big, that's what the evidence.
So it's our hope that as you're going through these, and we won't go through each one by one, but as you're going through these when you're doing the evaluation, you're going to have the evidence, the supporting evidence to be able to evaluate. And of course, you still will probably have some questions, and so you have that opportunity to ask throughout, but there'll be an extensive amount of documentation as y'all saw last year, but everyone has a role in this. Bill, Sean, Mark, everyone on the team has a role in making sure that we are really doing a good job of painting a picture of all of these different domains that are entailed within this.
So again, we're not going to hit bullet by bullet, but the other one now that goes to student services, right? So that's Ms. Lagore's kind of area. So what are some things that we look at? Well, we look at health and safety programs, we look at extracurricular programs, we look at student discipline. And so for each of these bullets, again, just to reiterate, you will have data that supports it. Okay? So that's educational leadership. That's one component of the superintendent's job description. When you flip the page, at the top of that page it says district management. So this one says facilities and operations. So that's just as important right? And so there's some bullets that we're looking for. Fiscal management, human resource management. So that's when we will look to Tony, that's when we will look to Dot to be able to say, here's what we want to evaluate the superintendent on. What evidence do we have that that we have systems in these place? And then the last page, board and community relationships, or relations, I should say. So what does the board relation look like? So is there evidence that the board was kept informed of significant issues? And so forth and so on. And then the community pieces, how are we, involving our business partners? How are we involving our parents and our school community? Okay, so this is their sample. We can choose to follow it exactly, or we can choose to modify it. And I think what makes most sense at this point is not to drop what's been in the past, because we have a pretty solid tool. We just need to update the tool, and that's why we're going to merge them together. And again, hopefully by the end of, it has to be in a couple weeks, because by May 6th, we have to have it ready for DEIC, and then a few days later, we'll share with you all. You'll have an opportunity to look at it, provide some feedback, and then you have an opportunity again in June, and then July you accept it, and then August is the actual evaluation.
When you show it to us in May, are you going to bring a copy of last year's tool
Yep,
as well?
so what I'll do is I'll bring last year's tool. You've already seen this, but I'll bring this, and then I'll bring the new one, and you can see the crossover.
We'll have last year's, just a summary, not the whole packet, not the evidence again.
We'll have just the tool.
Just the tool. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
We'll have
That'd be
last year's
good.
tool.
But if you want to see last year's, you'll be able to see it.
We have the full packet, so if we want to make it available, I just don't know. That would have to be in closed session, right? Because could that be asked as a public information document, then if we put it out? Oh, but the video said that even if it was asked, we can't.
Right.
We can't share it. But I would hate to be like, oh, here's
I think if someone wants to review it, you're more than welcome to come in and review it in the conference room to look at the supporting evidence and the final rating.
This would be your second evaluation with the district.
That's correct.
Just a clarifying question. So each of us, do we individually give numbers?
Yes.
And then we come together and
Kind of average them together.
Average them, okay.
Discussion.
And discuss it.
I'd like to look at it just a picture of what.
Yeah, that's why I'm just trying to wrap my
Yeah,
arms
and
around.
again, today's purpose was just to go through the timeline and to go through the policy and procedure. In May, you'll have that opportunity to see it. You'll have another opportunity in June. You'll have the opportunity to adopt it in July.
So we do it together, so it's not a...
You will do this, this, for example, if we were using this, you would have this evaluation tool, and then there would be dividers for each category with all of the supporting evidence in a notebook. And you'll be able to go through all of that, your experiences in the district, what you know, and provide a rating for each one, and then come back together. Cindy will have all of them. They'll be turned into Nancy. She'll get the average, and you'll have an opportunity to come together as a group, have discussion, look at that average, deliberate on whether you agree or not. But yes, you will spend some time, and I'm sure a significant amount of time,
overall
going through this.
Yeah. And so again, remember when I talked about the rating scale, theirs is exceeds, meets, I can't remember the exact wording.
Needs improvement.
What we're going to use is a 0 to 100 scale, because that just makes sense, right? Because when you ask somebody, so what does meets improvement look like?
Yeah.
I'm going to have something very different than you're going to have, than you're going to have, than you're going to have.
Is
But
that
I
what they
think
used last year?
the 1 to 100 scale. But I think everyone, we've been raised on that, right? Going through schooling ourselves, I think 1 to 100 makes sense, right? We all know what a 50 looks like. We know what a 90 looks like. We know what a 100 looks like.
At work, we've always used that need exceeds or needs.
Right. So,
But it's
what does that really mean,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Okay. So that's the timeline. That is a sample, and I know you would love to have that one. I guarantee you that next year, and that's why again, as we clean this up and make the process a better one, I think we'll be in a much better place next year, especially as we go through XG, as we're learning this together. And we just, again, that continuous improvement mentality. So the last thing that I want to do for today is just go through the policies. So I'm going to go tab by tab, but I'm going to go really quickly because I'm not going to read page by page, but I just want you to see how all this connects. So the first tab says policies, and then it is this page, and it just lists the policies. And we're going to go tab by tab. So AE. AE is our district vision, our mission statement, our belief statement, and our strategic priorities. And these were just adopted last March. And so overall, that's what we're trying to match. We're trying to match this here, because that's what we said that we have to live up to. Let's flip to the next divider, which is AIB. AIB is all around district performance report. That's our taper report. That's the annual report. I gave an update on it not so long ago. That is what we're going to use to fill out that domain worksheet, right? All the data about how students did. So that's why that's in here, okay? BAA, let's flip to BAA. BAA is the board legal status and the powers and duties, right? You all were sworn in to do certain things. That's what this talks about here. And so one of your duties is to evaluate the superintendent, and that's why it's here, okay? So keep flipping. Now we're looking at BJA. BJA, at the very top, it says Superintendent Qualifications and Duties. So we had the board duties. Now we're looking at what are the duties of the superintendent. What is the superintendent supposed to do? And there's the qualifications, and then there's the duties. And then at the beginning, we shared the job description. We didn't go into the job description, but it mirrors that. Okay? Keep going. It's lengthy, and now you understand where all those different subcategories come from, because you're going to see that in his duties. So now let's go to BJCD. BJCD is the actual evaluation. So what is the appraisal process? And the confidentiality statement, and then the objective. So that is what's on those 2 pages, which is what we just reviewed just a while ago. So if we go to the next tab, EHAA, this is around instruction, because most of the evaluation is tied to instruction and the results, right? Those student outcomes. What's required legally for a required curriculum? What do we need to do for that foundation? What do we do for physical education? So as you flip through that, that is all our basis that we have to cover. And it's several pages. Now let's look at what says 19, which is Texas Education or Texas Administration Code Chapter 150. That is the commissioner's rules. And again, we've already heard that several times. We have 2 options, and we're going to choose the locally developed option. That's what that page is saying.
The previous one,
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't see, like CTE type programs, is that evaluated somewhere else?
If you look under, on page 1 of 7, in EHAA enrichment curriculum, you see 1 through 4, 4 being fine arts. There's CTE is number 5.
Okay.
It's just on the back side of that.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, thank you.
A little hidden. Great question though, and thank you for asking. So then again, the commissioner's rule, the tab after that, it says domain worksheet. Right now there's nothing in there because we haven't populated that for you, but we already reviewed the domain worksheet, right, from the sample that I showed you all earlier. When you get this back, you will have the domain worksheet when it's ready with all the appraisal material. And then finally, you have that last tab that says final evaluation, and there's nothing here, right? But what will be in here is that instrument that y'all are going to view in May and then approve in July. Well, that is all I have. What else do you all have for me? For Dr. Gutierrez or for Mr. Lewis?
I have a question. The one tab we didn't look at was your job description.
We can go back.
How often are these updated or revised?
If you look at the first page,
2005.
2005.
Is there a policy that says we review these and look at them?
No. I mean, they're
I
updated
certainly like
regularly,
yours,
but
15 years old.
Right. Well, you know, his special knowledge, wait, hold on. Where did I see this? The very last page
For the job description,
of the job description. Equipment used, he should be able to use a typewriter. Adding machine.
y'all can give me a 0 for that one.
We need to
we're gonna do
revisit this.
No.
We need to
Like to-
revisit
I'm sure a
this.
lot of components haven't changed, but we can just get the updated version probably.
But even under
Well,
your,
then why would a typing
under the
test?
qualifications.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. How many words per minute?
Yeah, with the little typing book. I'd like to also talk about or discuss maybe adding to the qualifications a doctoral degree or a doctor's degree or something of that nature.
Yeah, we can when we bring the draft evaluation, we can bring an updated version of the job description for review as a draft.
Is there anybody, I guess this falls under HR, right? That goes back to look at all the job descriptions we have as to when Bill's
Yeah,
sitting there
it's HR,
checking his.
but we
his-
also, it's HR that has
Okay.
to. And I just want, I mean, it's, part of this is HR personnel, it's part of the evaluation too, and keep in mind, we have one professional on that team, and
Yeah.
I'll address that later, very soon. One professional position in that entire department.
And there's got to be bukus of job descriptions.
And we,
Custodial.
like, I review mine with my employees every year, and if we want to make adjustments, we do it, we submit those if we want to make changes. So ours get
Probably the only one that's
updated
updated.
frequently.
Because no one truly owns this one because
It's only the board.
it's only the board.
Yeah, and I don't know, how far back does Irene go, or did Irene go?
It's
2005,
probably,
I
that's what
think.
I'm saying, it's
Probably
probably,
the last time,
yeah.
yeah. So we definitely need to revisit it.
You made 2 suggestions, I wrote one down, the qualification, and then you said something, there was something else?
The working, being able to.
The working conditions, but I thought there was maybe something that I missed.
Take off
The
typewriter.
education
Education.
requirement.
I got that, so I guess that was the other thing, okay.
The typewriter.
The typewriter, the adding machine.
Living in the district is
Can you
probably
do a
here, I don't know
copier?
where it is.
Well, that's usually part of the contract,
Yeah.
is the residents.
All right, and
So you want us to take this with us?
so,
or-
yes, please. So what is for you to take right now is the timeline and then just kind of that checklist. That's the what's on the left-hand side of the binder. And you would please leave this. They do have your name, I think, at the top. And that's what we're going to continue to use this binder, and we're just going to fill it in as we go through this process.
Mark, I appreciate the way that you presented this because it can be very overwhelming and confusing, but the timeline is easy to follow, and just briefly touching on each policy and what the purpose was very helpful.
Very
to
helpful. I think
everyone.
last year we
Thank you
just
so
got you're going to evaluate the superintendent.
Well, and like I said, it needs to be tighter, it needs to be better. There are things that we continue
It
to
does.
do, but we will fix that. And so,
And I like the way you worked in the timeline into regular board meetings that we've had so that we don't have to get back and come again.
So last year's process was a little bumps in the road, or?
I thought so, yeah, and, Carl was there too.
I think
so
There was
just-
confusion as the way it was presented, it just caused confusion.
It was presented strangely. I didn't get information in a timely manner. Some of the tools were given to me the day we walked in. Some of them, I think, came in early. Anyway, it would have been nice if they'd all come in earlier so I could have had something drafted up. And then it was I didn't know what I was supposed to do.
First
Nobody
go around.
told me.
It's gonna be
Mr.
beneficial.
Flores wasn't very helpful, having done it many times, and I had gotten information from Dot, I think, to compare Matthew's salary to other superintendent's salary. That came in like, I don't know, like 30 minutes before the meeting or something. So everything was kind of just thrown at us.
And that was
haphazard.
prepared, that was ready to go.
Yeah.
We'll just, it'll be, all of those things have been worked out, and we'll continue to fine tune the process and extend it so that it's an entire school year, should we choose to stay
And we have a strategic plan.
with this model
Right.
and doing the evaluation in August. It doesn't need to be in August, but it's, in some ways makes sense because of the data
Okay, so last year you were evaluated what month?
in August.
Okay, so we have,
Started in
When
August.
we wrapped it up
Started in
September.
August, but we wrapped it up in
Yeah, it took,
September
I think, 2 weeks later.
on 9/11.
not that I'm keeping. Okay, so then we have a full year, or we can go longer than a year? The 15 months or?
You can go out to 15 months, but my concern about going out further is that you get, and now this sounds bad, but you have income that you're losing because you're going out that far.
The funding, you can't,
And then it's also tied to a
okay.
contract, and
you can't
Okay,
get, you
got
can't
it.
get it from anywhere else or something like that, as far as the funding, you only.
if you don't get evaluated within 15 months, you get paid by the district, so I don't know who would pay me.
Who passed by the sale?
That makes
A
sense.
benefit.
GoFundMe account.
No, in Region 20.
love that.
To say, you know,
Oh,
we
yeah.
brought that up, Region 20.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good job.
It's going to be great. Okay, so we will adjourn. Are you ready? Okay, it is 7:30.